Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Ron Frank and Glenn Kirschbaum, creators of Remembering Gene Wilder, a documentary that brings to life the endearing comic genius of legendary Jewish actor Gene Wilder. Stay tuned for an interview that's sure to make you want to binge watch Wilder in his most iconic roles, from Young Frankenstein to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and more. But first, if you enjoy this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. And also, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. Well, few comedic actors have left a more indelible mark on pop culture than Gene Wilder, whose brilliant performances in classics like The Producer's Blazing Saddles and Silver Streak made him one of the most beloved stars of his era. Fewer still have managed to infuse a sense of humanity in every role they play. A new biographical documentary, Remembering Gene Wilder, pays tribute to the celebrated Jewish actor and shines a light on an essential performer, writer, director, and all-around mensch. Directed by award-winning filmmaker Ron Frank and written by multi-time Emmy Award winner Glenn Kirschbaum, the film is moving and it's an entertaining portrait of Wilder's life and career, and features an array of highlights from Wilder's most memorable films, as well as interviews with Mel Brooks, Alan Alda, Carol Kane, Harry Connick Jr., Rain Pryor, Gene's widow Karen Wilder, and others. I'm fortunate to have Ron and Glenn with me today to talk about their career-spanning documentary honoring Wilder and to explore the magical man behind the character so many of us love. Remembering Gene Wilder made its world premiere at the Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival in May of last year, 2023, has screened at film festivals throughout the U.S., and is scheduled for a theatrical release in March of this year, followed by a digital release on all major platforms. Ron, Glenn, welcome. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, before we delve into the film itself, I want to talk first about your own backgrounds and what led you to create Remembering Gene Wilder. What inspired you to partner on this particular film? And did it have something to do with the way you connected with his on-screen roles? So, Ron, why don't you go first, and then Glenn?
Well, yes, thank you. I got affiliated with this project through our executive producers, David Knight and Julie Nimoy, Julie being the daughter of Leonard. And we had done a film about Leonard. It was related to what Leonard passed away from, which was COPD. The Nimoys and the Wilders are very close friends. And it turns out that they were interested, Karen Wilder was interested in doing a film that highlighted what she had gone through, meaning taking care of Gene at his end days of life because of Alzheimer's, which is what he passed away from. And what we decided to do, and Glenn and I have been not just friends, but co-workers and partners in film and this crazy business for many years. And what we decided to do was do something much more elaborate than just tell the story of Gene's Alzheimer's issues at the end of his life. So we wanted to celebrate his life and career. So with the help of Mel Brooks, who consented to do an interview, which was the beginning really of this, in addition to our interview with Karen, we just snowballed from there and got everybody else to join us on a really wonderful tribute to him. And I'm not just talking about the film, it's what we heard from all these people telling us. So that's really how this started.
So Glenn, I read through a list of the people Ron just mentioned, the interview with Mel Brooks, but there were many others. And I think it's important for a documentary maker to be able to have as many living resources as possible. So tell us about that list of luminaries who knew and worked with and loved Gene Wilder.
Well, I think that we early on determined that we wanted to interview the people who knew Gene, who had worked with Gene, and quite honestly, all loved Gene is what we determined. So it started with Mel Brooks, Karen Wilder, Alan Alda, the little boy, Peter Ostrom, who played Charlie in Willy Wonka. Everybody that we interviewed had the same thing to say, which was that Gene was an artist, Gene was a mentor, Gene was a mensch. We early on, there were biographies out there, there were films where people are looking to find dirt on someone. That wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted to celebrate Gene. And Ron and I, we're from the generation, we grew up loving these films. So that put pressure on us. We really wanted to do him justice. And the mere fact that Mel Brooks has tweeted how much he loves this film and Alan Alda loves the film, we feel like we've succeeded.
There are certain actors that you see that are acting and you enjoy the movie or the TV show. And there are others that you enjoy watching them act, but you also wonder about them as individuals. And now that you're saying this, I think of Gene Wilder in that way, is you want to know more about him. So give us a sense, if you will, of Gene's heritage and his roots, particularly his early years growing up in the Midwest and both of his parents' roles in his eventually becoming an actor. Ron?
Well, Gene was born in Milwaukee to Jewish parents. His father came from Russia. The family was not particularly religious, although Gene's grandfather was I think a layperson in their synagogue, but head of the synagogue. And I think Gene, and you can see a lot of this, and we talk about it when we talk about the Frisco Kid, the movie that he did, where he plays a rabbi that has to go across the country and turn it in the late 1800s. And so I think Gene's religion was not really first and foremost. What I learned in the course of making this film is that Gene was really a Francophile. He loved all things French. He liked elegant food, elegant wine, fine dining. Mel Brooks actually told us that Mel graduated from enjoying Manischewitz to learning about French wine, finer French wine, thanks to Gene, and has a wine cellar to this day in his Santa Monica home. So that was Gene. Religion didn't play a major role. He was, as his cousin says, mostly spiritual. He was a spiritual guy, and that's how I think he showed himself up in terms of any kind of religion.
Well, you wouldn't know it by watching the Frisco Kid, because he really he played the role so well. Glenn, Gene's fans might be surprised to learn that he achieved success on stage before he was discovered by Mel Brooks. When did he begin performing on stage? And tell us about his acting career prior to his film success.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key incidents from Gene's childhood, and I'm going to go back just prior to his performing on stage. When he was 8 years old, his mother had a heart attack. And her heart specialist said to young Gene, "Don't upset your mother. You could kill her. Make her laugh." And those words, and Gene talks about this in so many interviews on the Mike Douglas show, the Merv Griffin show, in his book. We have his audio recording of his autobiography. Gene likes to talk about that story, and that he kept everything bottled up because he didn't want to upset his mother. And as a result, the stage was an area where he was able to express himself. And his sister had first performed on stage. And then Gene, when he was a young child in Milwaukee, he joined a group called the Milwaukee Players. He performed on stage there. He also performed on stage. He went to the University of Iowa. And that's where he really found himself. He got to express himself. So it does go back to early childhood. And it also goes back to that one incident with his mother, where he had to keep things bottled up in his real life, and he could express himself on stage.
I will
So
add,
was the progression. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that we don't have this in the film, but it's in his autobiography. And As we said, we used his autobiography to tell the story. Gene tells this in first person. But I will add that Gene had almost a mystical experience watching Lee J. Cobb on Broadway doing Death of a Salesman when he was still a student at University of Iowa. And he then traveled back. He was so fascinated and taken by this mesmerizing performance. He traveled back to the University of Iowa and performed it many times over, and then got used to what it was like being on stage in a performance and falling into a role oblivious of reality and really into the acting experience. I think that's really where he got his acting chops. Turns out that he ended up performing in Death of a Salesman with Lee J. Cobb in a CBS television special in Los Angeles many years later, coincidentally.
So it wasn't a case of his saying at the age of 11, I want to be a movie star. It was really a progression. And the stage gave him that ability to act, and I suppose also to gain confidence and then to move to the next level. Tell me about his years in the Army. He spent some years in the Army. How do you think his experiences serving in the Army contributed to, or maybe shaped his work as an actor? Maybe his ability to empathize with or become the characters he played. What do you think, Glenn?
Well, I think he had exposure to people who had PTSD, who were dealing with trauma, and Gene says in our film that gave him empathy, and he used it in his acting. We cut immediately in our film from Gene talking about his military experience to his portrayal of Willy Wonka. And you do understand that Gene was a very contemplative performer. He when he was performing, he really immersed himself in whatever character he was portraying. And I think that military experience, being exposed to people who are going through difficult times, broadened him as a human being and gave him, a broader palette with which to portray his characters on camera.
And that was by choice. He went to this particular military base he went to was in Pennsylvania. He wanted that military base because it was a train ride away from New York City, where he, in the weekends, was going to acting school and studying acting. So he got the best of both worlds, so to speak, because he went to New York and he was training on the base as well.
Let's talk about Gene's image and his on-screen persona. His breakout role was as Leo Bloom, the zany, neurotic accountant in The Producers. As his star rose, did he continue to portray kind of these unstable, zany characters? I'm thinking of Young Frankenstein. Did he worry about being typecast at all? He was so successful in each of these roles, but was that a worry of his?
I don't know if you can call being, out of your mind a typecast. I guess so, but he didn't. I don't think so. I mean, he played an accountant in The Producers, played a cowboy and an outlaw in Blazing Saddles, totally different role, and much more calmer, I would say. We discovered that the tension that came out, the explosions of anger that you saw in some of those characters, actually came as a result, well, at least partly as a result of the suppression of any anger that he could portray or show to his mother. He was warned not to do that because of her heart condition. So having suppressed all that, it would come out in a lot of different ways. And we found quite a lot of examples of that in many of his films, I would say, not just the ones we mentioned.
Well, Glenn, speaking of playing Jewish characters, what do you think being Jewish meant to Gene personally? You've talked already that comes from a Jewish background, but not necessarily an observant one. Did he see being Jewish as a unique asset? And did he ever talk about encountering anti-Semitism anywhere?
I think when he was a child, he was sent away to a school where he did encounter some anti-Semitism. It was a military training. It was 1 year. And he certainly was aware, very much aware of his Judaism. I think his relationship with Mel Brooks, obviously, you're talking about a New York Jewish boy in Mel and a Milwaukee Jewish boy in Gene, very different. But I think it was something that they shared in common. And whether he was overtly Jewish or not, I mean, in Frisco Kid, yes, in other roles, not as much. But I think it did mean much to him. It certainly defined who he was. Gilda, his wife, was Jewish. So as far as the Frisco Kid is concerned, I mean, that is a film that played well, I think, in New York and maybe Miami, and no one else saw that. But it is interesting that was a role that Gene chose to play, a very, very Jewish film.
Yeah, well, whenever it's on, I try to watch it. It's one of those films I do not tire of. Ron, anything to add to that?
No, I would say that's absolutely correct. Ironically, there was not too many other Jews that worked on that set for Frisco Kid. His co-star, Harrison Ford supposedly has some Jewish background way back. The director was not Jewish. And I don't know about the writer. I forgot the writer's name. But anyway, that film itself, he took lessons to get the accent right, my understanding. Someone even corrected him on how to put the tefillin on correctly. So he wanted to make sure that he got this down and got it right. He knew who was watching. So,
and Dan,
he was
I just want to mention that Frisco Kid, the producer of Frisco Kid was a fellow named Mace Neufeld. We interviewed Mace. We interviewed his daughter Nancy, who played a Jewish Indian, and which she said was maybe not politically correct, but that was the role that she had. I just want to add this, that Mace Neufeld passed away maybe a month after our interview. And I suspect that if he was an elderly gentleman, but we wanted him to tell his story because he was the one who really pushed for this film to be made. He and Gene collaborated, obviously. I mean, this was meaningful to him. But Ron and I wanted to make sure that Mace Neufeld's interview made its way into our film, because here was this fellow who made the film. If our film had been on a network, on television, I suspect we would have been told, this gentleman is too old. We want to hear from younger people. We want to hear from people who were influenced by Gene Wilder. Well, that wasn't the film we made. We wanted to celebrate the people who made these amazing films. And I can't tell you how thankful Mace's daughter is. She's been in touch with us, thanking us for including her dad in the film, despite his advanced age. And that was, we wanted to make a film that had a lot of heart and, again, celebrated the people who made these amazing films.
Well, Gene was a special kind of comedic genius. His versatility is on display in your documentary, too. He acted, he made movies, and he collaborated with others whose comedic brilliance matched or complemented his quirky and unique style. We see that in all of the films. And he played off well against those characters. Why do you think that his projects hit the right note with audiences then and now? Because it's when you watch these films, and there's a reason I think that they keep bringing them back on TV, is that people don't tire of them. So,
I think that Gene, he wasn't a comedian; he was a comedic actor. There's a significant difference, and I think that when you see his performances, what we were told by everybody else is that he played it real. He didn't push, he didn't force the laugh, and made it, I think, much more accessible for audiences. When you watch him, you believe him, and making it believable was the key to his comedy and his acting. So he knew, even when he was studying acting, that he was going to, he wanted to be funny. And he wasn't ready to do Shakespeare. He was ready to do this kind of filmmaking. And that was really what guided him in the roles that he chose. And it went beyond acting. I mean, Gene wanted to write and direct. And so he became a director and writer to do his own projects. Didn't have anybody else telling him what to do. I think it was the bottom line for Gene, and his Karen would tell, his wife would tell you this. It was where he could display his creativity was really the key for him, probably more than anything else. Where he could display his, whether it was writing a novel or painting or creating music, which he had even done. So I think that's really what drove him the most.
You know, you said something that it occurs to me that I'll ask this question. Do you think that Gene pioneered a kind of slapstick that was based not so much on the physical, but on the psychological? Glenn?
Absolutely. Yeah, not only psychological. I think Gene portrayed the everyday man, and he was a student of history. He watched Charlie Chaplin. He was inspired by Laurel and Hardy. I mean, these are people who are facing obstacles in life that we can all relate to. So there was something about Gene that was highly relatable, and yes, psychological. I mean, how many of us, we've all experienced frustration and rage, and you know, his characters were put into situations that, you know, were highly identifiable. And I think that, you know, Ben Mankiewicz, who's in our film, was able to put Gene in perspective, that, you know, that he was a figure who was in a long litany of comedic actors that were relatable, that we saw ourselves in these characters, and yes, very much psychological, and funny, for lack of a better word. Gene makes us laugh.
Well, no conversation about Gene Wilder would be complete without talking about, for a moment, his relationship with the iconic Jewish comedian Gilda Radner. He was married to her for 5 years before her death from ovarian cancer in 1989. How do you approach telling the story of their relationship?
We didn't dwell on it too long. There's been a film and documentary, a good one, done on Gilda. We wanted to really focus more on the marriage. When we talked about Gene's wives, we wanted to focus more on Karen and his relationship with Karen. Karen was probably, and this is working backwards to answer your question, Karen was the love of his life. They were probably married about 26 years or something like that. And he was really most in love with Karen. The relationship with Gilda was, I think, challenging, to say a word. It was challenging for Gene. There was a big age difference. And Gene was a bit of a father figure, I guess, to Gilda. They were very much in love, and they had a wonderful life together. And Gene really had to step up to the plate, which he did, as friends have told us, when Gilda got sick. So there was a deep affection there for each other. But I think Karen was the special love of his life.
What did Karen bring to the making of the documentary? The perspective on what kind of person Gene was beyond the cameras, if you will. Glenn?
I think when Karen doesn't really appear until the final third of the film, but she brings such a sense of heart and humanity. Gene could be himself with Karen. You know, they chose to live in Connecticut. Gene was not a big fan of Hollywood. You know, he liked the lifestyle of living away from the madness, the craziness of LA. And so we get to see the genuine side of Gene, The fact that he enjoyed doing watercolors, the fact that he enjoyed performing in theater, the tap dancing lessons that Karen and Gene did together. So he was himself with her. He didn't need to put on an act. And she was madly in love with him. I think from the moment she met him, there's a line that is not in the film. I think we were afraid that Karen might have been offended. Ben Mankiewicz, in talking about Gene's beautiful blue eyes, he said, he looked like Paul Newman's crazy younger brother. And and Karen has since told us if we ever do a recut, she wants that in there. She said, anyone who compares my husband to Paul Newman, I want that line in there. But yeah, when you meet Karen, there's we can understand what Gene was attracted to. She is just a good soul, and she was there when he needed her most, and that comes through in the film.
I would say that also, Karen, without Karen, we would have half a movie. I mean, it's her. She opened up the door for all the personal photos that are in this film, the videos, all the estate holdings. She made this film possible, and she's a big supporter of the film and also a very good friend. Karen has traveled with us to do the Q&As. She'll be appearing in Atlanta. And so she's been extremely helpful and a wonderful person.
In retrospect, many might consider Gene as a real Renaissance man, actor, writer, artist. Do you think that your film will spur a renewed examination of Gene's contribution, new generations, to cinematic history and to new and future generations? What do you think?
I certainly hope so. I'll just go quick, and then I'm sure Ron will want to weigh in on this as well. What we've found is this tremendous sense of nostalgia. People of our generation, when they see these films, it brings people right back to their childhoods. At the same time, the young people, this for many of them, this is their first real introduction to the full breadth of what Gene Wilder was. They may have known him as the original Willy Wonka, but now when they see him, first the three films that he made with Mel Brooks, and then almost when the Richard Pryor films come along, there's almost a sense of, oh my God, I forgot just how many wonderful films he was involved with. And for us, the joy of reintroducing people to Gene Wilder is, yes, there may be a reexamination of who he was, and he may now be added to the pantheon of great comedians.
I would say that after we do these screenings, we've been approached, many people have told us, young people have told us they're going out and renting his movies, or some of them have already rented his movies and come and told us to get an idea about Gene. The younger people, as you know, are familiar only through Gene, only through Willy Wonka, and that's only because Willy Wonka, which bombed at the box office, survived on DVD and garnered a whole new audience from kids from the 1980s on, whenever DVDs started. So it's been interesting to see that the young people, it opens up a whole world, particularly what we focus on deeply is the collaboration between Gene and Mel. This was a collaboration, as Ben Mankiewicz says, like, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, that the two of them were locked together as a team and fed off each other. And so I think people are enlightened by this because they've never maybe even seen Gene. The first time I saw Gene was in the movie theater, and it was Blazing Saddles. I couldn't get over his hair because he had this wild hair, and I was a teenager and I had wild hair, and I go, oh boy, you can make it on the screen with hair like that? That was interesting. But he was hilarious. Blazing Saddles was hilarious. So that, I think, for people today, yes, they can go, all his movies, or most of them anyway, are available on streaming somewhere, and I think a lot of people end up watching them.
Go ahead. Add just one last statement. I think what is especially gratifying for Ron and myself is, in light of the events of October 7th, it's so important to laugh, especially in times of darkness. And we know that as the Jewish people have survived for 4,000 years by finding humor, by being able to laugh even in the most difficult of times. And we're hoping that that'll be the contribution of this film, that here in the darkest of times, people will still be able to gather together and find a reason to laugh at our own foibles, and see our humanity through Gene Wilder.
Yeah, and absolutely right, Glenn. And the great thing about film, in any case, is that it lives on. It lives on, and if it's truly the work of a creative comedic genius, in this case, it will be relevant in generations going forward. Now, you will have an opening in this program will air before you have your big opening, which is in March, correct?
Right.
March. You said March 15th, and that will be where?
In New York and LA, I believe. I don't know where. I don't think LA, the theater's locked yet. I believe it'll be in the Quad Cinema in New York.
But I heard there may be as many as 10 theaters nationwide. It's still being worked out. We don't have the details quite yet.
Well, we hope there'll be a lot of interest. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest. Okay, well, this is less of a question and more of a comment, picking up on what Glenn just said, that when the world is so dark, it's important to share and enjoy rays of light. And Gene's story certainly is that. Remembering Gene Wilder made its world premiere at the Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival in May of 2023. It's scheduled for a theatrical release in March of this year. You just heard that, followed by a digital release on all major platforms. Ron, Glenn, as we conclude, I want to thank you both for speaking with me and for bringing Gene Wilder's extraordinary career and legacy to life and to new generations of comedy lovers. Really great that you could be with us. I'm wishing you continued success with the film.
Thank you so much, Dan. A pleasure.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, this wraps up another superb episode of the Conversations with B'nai B'rith podcast. Thank you to my guests, Ron Frank and Glenn Kirschbaum, for joining us, and to you for tuning in to our show. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode with friends, post about it on social media, or leave us a comment or a rating. We love hearing from you. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course, like us on Facebook. Stay tuned for more exciting content in our next episode. Until then, for my guests, Ron Frank and Glenn Kirschbaum, this is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Take care, everyone.